Infernals. In Fire Force, Infernals are not villains created by experiments, curses, or artificial enhancement. They are the baseline result of human interaction with fire after the Great Cataclysm. When spontaneous human combustion occurs, a normal person ignites from within and transforms into a living mass of flame. Their body becomes charcoal-like, sustained entirely by fire, and in most cases their consciousness collapses almost immediately. This establishes the most important rule: fire is not power by default. It is loss of control. What makes Infernals uniquely disturbing is that they are still alive. They experience constant pain and in some cases retain fragments of memory, emotion, or awareness. They are not mindless monsters by design. They are humans whose bodies failed to survive ignition. This is why Fire Force treats their destruction as a mercy killing rather than a victory. The ritual prayers performed afterward are not symbolic gestures. They reinforce that ignition is a tragedy, not an upgrade. Fire is framed as something that erodes identity unless it is actively resisted.
The flame is the soul's breath. The black smoke is the soul's release. Ashes thou wert in art, may thy soul return.
A clear example of this is Tempa, an infernal who retained his consciousness over centuries. His existence proves that infernalization is not instantaneous erasure, but a gradual collapse. He demonstrates that willpower can slow the loss of self, but it cannot reverse the process. He is not powerful because he burns longer. He is horrifying because he survives burning at all. At a structural level, Infernals exist to anchor the entire power system in consequence. Every later ability is measured against this outcome. No matter how refined or spectacular a pyrokinetic becomes, the audience understands that failure means reverting to this state. Infernals are the reminder that Fire Force power does not reward ambition. It punishes instability. Second-generation pyrokinetics. Second-generation pyrokinetics represent the first stable deviation away from becoming an infernal. They cannot create fire under any circumstances. Instead, they manipulate flames that already exist, whether those flames come from the environment, infernals, or other fire users. This limitation is intentional and foundational. Their power is not about producing energy, but about governing it.
I'll use your flames to make it go even faster.
Their abilities focus on controlling the behavior of heat itself. This includes redirecting flames, amplifying or suppressing explosions, altering trajectories, converting kinetic energy into thermal energy, or changing how heat propagates through space. Because they are restricted to manipulation rather than creation, second generations develop extreme specialization. Their effectiveness depends entirely on precision, situational awareness, and timing, rather than raw output. The defining example of this generation is Maki. Maki's abilities allow her to control flames from an ultra-wide distance. She can neutralize catastrophic explosions, redirect large-scale attacks, or reorganize flames into controlled constructs. She demonstrates that second-generation power scales not with intensity, but with discipline and finesse. From a system design perspective, second generations exist to dismantle the assumption that creators automatically outrank controllers. Fire Force deliberately positions them as natural counters to higher output users. This reinforces the idea that the power system values mastery and restraint over excess, grounding the escalation that follows. Third-generation pyrokinetics. Third-generation pyrokinetics are defined by their ability to create fire through a personal ignition ability. Unlike second generations, who can only manipulate existing flames, third generations generate heat directly from their own bodies. This ignition is always anchored to a specific biological point or external catalyst, such as the feet, hands, mouth, eyes, or a weapon. This restriction is a structural rule of the system, not a stylistic one. It ensures that no third generation can access fire freely or infinitely. The ignition point determines how fire can be applied. A lower body ignition favors speed and propulsion. An upper body ignition favors projection and shaping. Weapon-based ignition introduces precision and amplification. Because of this, third-generation power is not measured by flame volume, but by how effectively a user converts heat into a function. Fire Force treats ignition like an organ rather than an energy pool, making technique, physical conditioning, and combat IQ inseparable from power. While third generations can shape their own flames, their control is inherently narrower than that of second generations. They cannot seize or override external fire with authority. Once flames leave their ignition range, they are no longer fully dominant over them. This creates a deliberate weakness in the system and explains why second generations often counter them effectively. Third generations trade absolute control for independence. What makes this generation dominant in combat is self-sufficiency. Third generations never rely on environmental fire. They can operate at full capacity in any situation, making them the backbone of frontline combat. Their flames function as extensions of their bodies, allowing fire to be converted into propulsion, plasma, electromagnetic effects, sensory enhancement, or physical augmentation, as long as heat remains the initiating force. A clear example is Shinra Kusakabe, whose ignition manifests through his feet. Shinra does not simply burn opponents. He converts combustion into acceleration, momentum, and impact. His combat style demonstrates how third generations weaponize motion rather than raw flame, turning fire into a means of movement instead of destruction. Despite their versatility, third generations are still bound by physical law. Reaction time, endurance, and biological tolerance impose a hard ceiling that ignition alone cannot surpass. This ceiling is intentional. It marks the point where fire can no longer scale through refinement or training alone. Beyond this limit, further escalation requires either perfect stabilization, seen in hybrids, or abandoning physical constraints entirely, which leads directly into fourth-generation abilities. Hybrids. Hybrids are pyrokinetics who possess both second and third-generation traits, meaning they can generate their own fire while also exerting high-level control over external flames. According to the internal logic of Fire Force's system, this combination should not exist. The generational structure deliberately separates creation and control to prevent any single user from reaching unchecked dominance. Hybrids exist not because the system fails, but because their bodies achieve a level of stability that most humans never reach. What allows hybrids to exist is not greater power, but greater compatibility. Their bodies can handle both the internal strain of ignition and the external strain of manipulating surrounding heat. This makes them fundamentally different from standard pyrokinetics, where other users must choose between output or control. Hybrids suffer no such limitation. They can overwhelm opponents with raw firepower and immediately suppress or redirect opposing flames without switching modes or conditions. The defining advantage of hybrids is efficiency under pressure. They do not rely on environmental fire, nor are they restricted to shaping only their own flames. They can seamlessly transition between offense, defense, and battlefield control. This makes them devastating in prolonged combat, as they never exhaust their tactical options. In system terms, hybrids represent the last stage where fire remains subordinate to human will. The ultimate example of this state is Benimaru Shinmon. Benimaru is capable of generating massive flames while simultaneously exerting precise, large-scale control over heat. He does not struggle to stabilize ignition or regulate output. His body handles both effortlessly. This places him at the absolute ceiling of what a human can achieve within the physical rules of the world. Fourth-generation pyrokinetics. Fourth-generation pyrokinetics do not represent an evolution of earlier generations. They represent a categorical shift. These users gain access to an Adolla Burst, an ignition state that radically amplifies their connection to Adolla. At this level, fire ceases to behave like heat and instead functions as a fundamental variable of reality. When an Adolla Burst is active, controlling heat means controlling the effects heat has on the universe. Movement, expansion, perception, and causality become interconnected systems rather than separate phenomena. Fire Force does not introduce new mechanics here. It simply follows its existing rules to their most extreme conclusion. If heat governs motion, and motion governs time, then controlling heat allows indirect control over time itself. The most extreme example of this tier is Shokusakabe. Sho's ability halts time by cooling the expansion of the universe, isolating himself in a state where only he can move. This is not framed as speed or reaction. It is framed as cosmic interference. His power demonstrates that fourth-generation abilities are no longer bound to combat logic, but to universal mechanics. However, this level of power is inherently unstable. The human body is not designed to withstand this degree of dimensional overlap. Without Adolla Grace, fourth-generation abilities collapse almost immediately. Adolla Grace functions as an external stabilizer, reinforcing the user's existence long enough to prevent reality from rejecting them outright. This final restriction is what preserves the system's integrity. Fourth-generation power is never permanent, never self-sustaining, and never fully controllable. It is borrowed, conditional, and revocable. Fire Force ensures that even at its most absurd, its power system remains internally consistent by enforcing a final rule. No human is allowed to permanently control reality without consequence.